Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Her name is Courteney Turner. First name is spelled Courtenay, and it's Turner. And she is the proprietor of the Courteney Turner podcast. It's in the top 1.5% podcast in the world. And I was on her show back in late December. We talked about the whole Balenciaga scandal, but then we kind of touched bases on social media. I know she's done a lot of research into the subject, which is in the title of this talk, which is the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. I didn't know how much she did, so I was just kind of scrolling through her catalog, and I saw she's been on a lot of shows talking about this subject, which is overlap with some of my research. So we were supposed to go live last week, but I just had a conflict. I really wasn't ready, but in that time, I've kind of covered the two main books that I know of. And we're kind of talking in the pre-show about that, which is the Tavistock Institute of Human Affairs by John Coleman, and then the Daniel Estulin book, Tavistock Institute, Social Engineering the Masses. And one was, I think, there she is. She's holding them up right there. So the first one, I think, was by Coleman, which was put out in 2005. And then the Estulin book, I think it was like 2011, but there was maybe a second edition or something like that in 2015. Yeah. But she has, her website is her full name. So I'll put links to all this in the show notes. She's on Twitter, Truth Social, Instagram, Telegram. And she also has articles at truthmatters.biz. And I will put links to her link tree as well. But this is an interesting subject. It overlaps with some of my early research about this whole kind of mind control and just like writ large, even recently in this whole COVID event and the mass social engineering is really remarkable. But it goes all the way back. It goes back very far, probably to the late 19th century, early 20th century. But she can talk more about that. So Courteney Turner, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So for people who may not have heard your name or what you're up to or your research, maybe you could do a little bit of background, talk about your you have very detailed research episodes. So I recommend people check those out. But maybe you can talk about your episodes and what led you to Tavistock and your research into the subject.
Sure. So I kind of woke up in 2020. I was pretty late to the party. I always make the joke that, it took me forever to find this train station. Then I found the high-speed rail, and I've been scrambling to try and catch up with everyone here. But I did wake up in 2020. That was kind of my first foray because I was living out in Santa Monica, California, and the mandates were pretty egregious and very tyrannical. And for those who are not familiar with my story, I have kind of an unusual set of birth circumstances. I'm blind in one eye. I had a cataract when I was first born. I'm hearing impaired bilaterally. I actually learned how to speak by reading lips. I didn't get hearing aids, so I was almost 6 years old. I had heart surgery when I was 1 year old. I had stunted growth, fine graphic motor impairment. I was missing a bunch of teeth, and they basically told my parents the best they could hope for me was to find a nice institution for me to spend my life. Fortunately, they were wrong, and I am here. But my parents did sue for my birth. I was actually called a wrongful birth, and I share all this because this is relevant to kind of how I got into this work. I was out in California in Santa Monica, and everybody was wearing a mask, and I didn't realize how much I depended on nonverbal cues for clarity of speech until all the coping mechanisms I spent my entire life developing were then stripped from me by a face diaper, essentially. And so I found myself just incredibly isolated, depressed, really just very frustrated. And I started doing, of course, I got fired from the both jobs that I was at. All of my speaking events got canceled. I was just really feeling pretty down, and it was not a great time, but I started researching. I found myself with lots of time, and so I started really diving down rabbit holes. And as I was doing that, I started posting on social media so I could communicate with people, and I found myself in the midst of lots of arguments, and I really didn't think what I was posting was all that contentious. It was actually really kind of strange to me, but I've now learned that you can post an orange on social media and people will argue with you that it's not an orange. So there's that. But I encountered a lot of people who started telling me that I should, start a podcast. And I was so unfamiliar with this whole world. I really didn't even know what podcasts were. It's not like I had ever listened to podcasts. In fact, I tell the joke, it sounds funny now, but people were telling me when they heard my birth story, oh, you need to be on Rogan. And I was like, what's a Rogan? Why do I need to be on it? And I now, for the record, know who Joe Rogan is. I've listened to a lot of his shows, and I understand why they were saying that. However, at the time I really didn't, but I started listening to podcasts and I found it was, a way to keep me company because I wasn't able to see people and have communication the way that I had previously. So it was kind of a way to keep me company when I went on long hikes and runs and whatnot. And the idea of starting my own just terrified me. But then it dawned on me that it would be a way to have naked face conversations and that might save my life. So I committed to 6 months of just engaging in discourse with people and recording it. And I told them I might not air it, but I found it so fulfilling and I really enjoyed it. And the guests seemed to really enjoy it. So I aired my first one in January of 2021. And we kept going. And I would say that Tavistock, it was I believe it was actually in 2020, but I had a friend who messaged me for some reason, all these like very pressing things. My friends want to message me at midnight to tell me it's urgent and I need to. They asked me if I'd ever heard of Dr. John Coleman, and I said no. And so he sent me a video. It was like a 45-minute speech that he did on the Committee of 300. I think it's the only speech I can really found. Since then, I've actually found interviews he did on InfoWars with Alex Jones. I found some audio clips. So I have found a little bit more since then. But at the time, this is, I believe, still on YouTube, surprisingly enough, but this video. And I was like transfixed and totally riveted. And I started looking for whatever other material he may have written or interviews he may have done. And I found his book, Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And it was funny because the friend who had messaged me said, watch this and then call me. And we were up till like 5 a.m. discussing it. But I I got the book. At the time I did the PDF download because it was retailing for almost $5,000. And now I think you can get it on Amazon for about 30. So it's the price has come down considerably. I don't know how much they may have edited it in the process, but they tend to do that. But you can get it for much cheaper now. But at the time I printed it out and I read the PDF version and I read it 3 times in a week because it was just so I don't know. For me, I think it was a big wake up because I had always considered myself kind of, I guess, like an establishment Republican. I was very, and I was always oppositional in the environments in which I was, the milieu I was immersed in at the time because I grew up right outside New York City, and it was a very leftist kind of. Area. I was on the debate team and they were always arguing with me. My position was never never well received. I got penalized in school for my political views. I then moved out after college to California, and I was in the entertainment industry, and it was, much easier to not discuss politics because really nobody agreed with me. And then it was around 2011, and I had joined a group. It was called Friends of Abe. And it was modeled after Friends of Dorothy because the running joke was that it was easier to come out as a gay person in the entertainment industry than it was as a conservative. And so it was started by Gary Sinise, and this was like a fellowship that really was the purpose of it, to be a fellowship community where people could, just really talk, because a lot of people couldn't talk in the industry without risk of being fired. And I know that sounds extreme, but that was really the experience that I've heard so many share. So I became a member of this group, and it was the first time I started, really sharing my viewpoints again. And I had a friend who had written a book, and it was all about the Frankfurt School. So I would say this was kind of my first like mini wake up, because I was a philosophy major in college, and I realized that I had been taught about these thinkers from such a different vantage point than what the reality was, and who they really were, and what the ideas that they were promulgating. And it was very familiar to me because of just the different worlds that I had been in. The philosophy, I was very immersed in psychology. Growing up, I wrote 285-page theses on dream analysis in high school. My high school actually published my theses. So, I had an extensive background in psychology, philosophy, and the entertainment industry. Frankfurt School was very instrumental in Aufheben de culture, otherwise known as, or translated to, cancel culture. And so that was the first time I started to perceive things in a different way, because I had always said that I was fiscally conservative and socially liberal because it was just more palatable to people, and they kind of left me alone when I said that. Like, oh, okay, I guess we can tolerate that. But then it was really the foray into the Frankfurt School thinkers and understanding the cultural infiltration, Gramsci and we can save that for another day. But
But
when
it
I
is overlap with this subject. I thought of Gramsci when I thought of Rees, which is the same concept of infiltrating every institution. But please continue. Yeah.
No, I agree. And so that for me was the first time when I realized, wait, these two can't be extricated from one another. They're enmeshed, and intentionally so. And so that was kind of where I had a little bit of, okay, that, like, I guess I took like half the red pill. But then when I read the Tavistock book, part of the reason I read it 3 times in a week was because it opened my eyes to just how much of everything I've been lied to about. And, all the worlds kind of converge. And Tavistock is really where the Frankfurt School converges with the Fabian Socialists. The Tavistock was largely founded by the Fabian Socialists, and many of the Frankfurt School thinkers were refugees, like Kurt Lewin was a refugee who was brought into the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. So I really see it as that was kind of a big wake up call to me. And it was when I first started to realize that my framework of, how I saw the landscape from the political vantage point was not quite accurate. That this really it supersedes politics. And then politics are
Right.
used, right? Politics are used as a great target audience for marketing. It's to create
Right.
identities and allegiances so that they can target people to pit them against each other. And really, the social engineering is way supersedes any political type of affiliation. And this is why we have terms like the uniparty, where you realize they're using the Hegelian dialectic to advance the same agenda, regardless of which side it's coming from.
It's the culture that precedes the politics, right? So the culture of the Fabians and the Frankfurt types. Maybe it's a good starting point to define those for people who don't know. Some people don't know what a Fabian socialist like Wells is, or some of these other characters, or Frankfurt, but it's like Adorno, Marcuse.
So the Frankfurt School actually started, it was right after the Bolshevik Revolution, and Lenin called a meeting between Willy Munzenberg, Antonio Gramsci, and Georgy Lukács. And he was very concerned. He said he didn't understand why it was that, the revolution didn't spread throughout the West. Karl Marx promised that it would, and that wasn't happening, and he didn't understand why. And so he called this meeting, and you can read about this in Antonio Gramsci's grandson's memoirs. It's the only place I found it, and people have argued with me that this isn't true, but you can find it in his memoirs. I'm pretty sure his grandson had the goods on this. But so they had this meeting, and it was Gramsci there, which makes a lot of sense, who said the problem is that you're looking at this as an economic problem, and you're aiming at an economic revolution, but this has to be done through the culture. As long as people are culturally entrenched and holding on to their cultural belief system, this will never work. You will never see the type of revolution that you're hoping to achieve. And it was pretty shortly afterward that they set up the Frankfurt School in Germany, Frankfurt, Germany. And it was originally called the Institute for Marxism. That's the translation of it. But then they changed it to the Frankfurt School. And of course, later in about 1933, when with the rise of Nazi Germany, most of these Frankfurt School philosophers were Jewish, and so they were fleeing, and they left and they set up the Institute for Social Research in 1933 or 1934 at Columbia University was the first place. Now they have the Institute for Social Research.
They all pretty much came to the U.S., right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the Frankfurt School. So they were all kind of left wing, if not far left, kind of ideologues.
They were Marxist. It was the
Marxist.
Institute for Marxism. So some of the earlier ones, as you mentioned, Adorno, of course, Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse was the one who wrote the famous Repressive Tolerance, who said we accept everything from the left and we reject everything from the right in 1957. There was Erich Fromm. There was, and a lot of them were very Freudian. Horkheimer. Who else was there? Frankfurt School thinkers, but I could.
But you see that bleed over into Tavistock, right? A lot of Freud. But then the Fabian socialists are different, right? Fabian is the Roman general who, like slow infiltration or attrition, was able to beat Hannibal, right? So that's what, and it goes to today. Like people say, oh, it's Fabian social. No, it's not dead. Like the prime minister of a lot of these prime ministers are Fabian socialists, but it goes back to Wells or even before that, right?
Wells was, it was actually the American Society for Psychical Research was one, but that was an organization right before. I think that started in 1885, and they helped to found the Fabian Socialist Society. The Fabian Society is what it was called. And yeah, it was people like H.G. Wells. I think Kipling was a member. Later, it's right around the same time, right? 1875 was the Theosophical Society was started. Madame Blavatsky, Alcott, who was tied to the British intelligence. And there were 19 members of Theosophical Society, but Besant was also a Fabian socialist. So you had this organization, and as you pointed out, it was modeled after Fabius, and it was this idea of incrementalism, slow and steady wins the race. This is where Coleman talks about, long range penetration and interdirectional conditioning, and this is very much the Fabian model. So their mascot is the tortoise, modeled after this idea of incrementalism, slow and steady infiltration, and then their coat of arms is the wolf in sheep's clothing. And I think that's a nod to the Hegelian dialectic that they weaponize.
Right, I think you're right. Let me see if I can pull that up just so people can see it, because I think it's pretty telling. This is the Fabian socialist.
There you go.
Thing. And this is it. It's kind of like
George Bernard Shaw was a Fabian socialist. Yeah.
Right. A think tank aims to advance socialist cause by gradualist and reformist means. And this is from the headquarters of the Fabian Society, is this glass pane. You can see the crest of the wolf in sheep clothing between these guys over a map of the earth. So they had very ambitious aims, right? Full global influence.
Exactly. Yeah.
So these are the guys who influenced Tavistock, right? But it wasn't always Tavistock. It was called, what was it, Wellington House or something like that before it was?
Yes. So it was actually called the British Propaganda Bureau. So when I talk about Tavistock, I go even further back. I start with Wilhelm Wundt. Wilhelm Wundt was he was the first psychologist, the first person to call himself a psychologist. He was known as the father of psychology, although in America they attribute that to William James. But William James was actually a student of Wilhelm Wundt through the Leipzig connection. And there is a great little book. It's a tiny book by Paolo Leone. It's called The Leipzig Connection, and it's actually a class also, but I don't know why class isn't listed on this, but the two of them wrote this book, and that was very instrumental in the research of Anthony Sutton, particularly in this book, The American Secret Establishment, and also our friend here, Charlotte Iserbyt, her work.
Right.
The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America.
Right. And you had John Kleitchek on your show too. I've talked to him as well.
Yes, I love John Kleitchek. He's awesome. I just had him on again. I'll air that probably next week. He was at our Cause Fest too, because
Oh, nice.
I did an event. It's called Creative Artists Uniting for the Sovereignty of Everyone, in attempt to combat some of this cultural social engineering and offer some alternative culture that's not completely degenerate. So
Right. Or demoralizing or whatever. I mean,
yeah,
it's really incredible. I mean, that was another theme of Coleman's book too, was this whole degeneracy, like enforced degeneracy. It's really incredible.
I
Well,
know.
you know.
Yeah, it really is. It's so
So
cool.
William Wundt, I'm not Wilhelm Wundt. I vaguely remember that name. So in Germany, I assume, right? What's his importance to
So
Tavistock?
yes, he's in Germany. He was in Leipzig University. He became one of the like what he became the chair of, let me see, what, I just want to get the year right. It was 1875. He became the chair of philosophy. But he was really one of the first experimental psychologists, and he was a Hegelian, so that's very worth noting. For people who are not familiar with Hegel believed that the state was God, and that we could not achieve any kind of power, like we can't achieve any kind of freedom as individuals without complete subservience to the state. And of course, people are familiar with the Hegelian dialectic, right? I had mentioned the Aufheben de Kultur that the Frankfurt School codified, and that was, I think, really drawing from Hegel's Hegelian dialectic, where he said it's the abstract, negative, and concrete. And the negative in German, the term is Aufheben, and it's a very oxymoronic term that means to lift up and preserve while simultaneously canceling and tearing down. And I think that is very relevant for these people, because they were Hegelians and they did create these these dialectical poles. So Wilhelm Wundt was not only instrumental in creating the field of psychology, which of course is what Tavistock is, all about, and he was also very instrumental in the influence over the field of education. And I don't know how many PhD students. I think it was 86 PhD students. He was the first to give PhDs, and he ended up with 186 students, PhD dissertation students. Um, and some of his students are people like Granville Stanley Hall, who was a mentor to John Dewey. And we know what John Dewey's role in the exploitation of the Prussian model of the education system was, and the Hegelianization of education. And Anthony Sutton does go through a lot of this in his book, so I highly recommend that if you want a deeper dive on the connection. He calls it the Americanization of Wundt. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That was actually Fichte's analysis of Kant's dialectic. And Hegel rejected both Kant and Plato's notion of the dialectic because he felt like it was too passive, too abstract, and intellectual. He wanted something that would be a scientific, and I use the term scientific, not scientific, but really a methodology that would advance the historicity of man. He really revered, like, what he called world historical figures, people like Napoleon, who changed the course of history. And he was looking for a method that would be able to advance the historicity of man. So I just want to point out that I start out with Wundt because he also taught Pavlov. Pavlov was part of the Leipzig connection, and people like Pavlov, created this idea that human beings could be lab rats. And when you look through the history of Tavistock, that's what they did. I think this is part of, what is so really egregious about their work, is that it was, really taking human beings to not only assess like human behavior, but also to figure out how they could change and modify, mold, shape, and socially engineer human behavior. But they did it through all of these kind of lab rat testing modalities. So, and he was also the teacher to, as I mentioned, William James and Cattell. Cattell was really instrumental in bringing that whole look-see method of reading. So this is where we did away with phonics, and it was Gallaudet used it for the deaf community, and for the deaf community, it was a wonderful thing because they can't, you know, uh, they don't have the same capabilities to sound out phonics. So having that whole picture method was very useful and valuable for them. But for most people, it erodes their ability to uh, engage in kind of in critical thought processes that help them to figure out reading. And this is part of the demise of reading comprehension, I think, in our education system. So Cattell was one of the people who did that. And this is also worth noting, just because I think, the secret society connections, I think, are worth pointing out and, recognizing. So his grandfather, Wilhelm Wundt's grandfather, was Kirchenrat, I never say it right, Kirchenrat Karl Casimir Wundt, and he was known as Raphael in the Illuminati. So,
Wow. So he's the offspring, grandson of Illuminists.
mhm.
Wow. Not surprised. They're like retreading, like in Europe, not as much here, but in Europe, they're really finding out that the Illuminati was an important aspect of the Enlightenment. That here it's kind of like put into a conspiracy box or something
Well,
like that.
it
But like
depends.
credible.
It depends on which Enlightenment, right? We've got the English, the British Enlightenment, we've got the French Enlightenment, the American Enlightenment, we've got the Counter Enlightenment with Kant and Hegel. Sorry, not Hegel. Yeah, I guess I would put Hegel, Marx, certainly. But yeah, the Bavarian Illuminati, and they were actually known, their original name was the Order of the Perfectibilists. They believe that man could be the perfectibility of man through man. It's a very Gnostic belief system. But there's also the Scottish Enlightenment, which was very influential on the American founding fathers. And this was a Scottish common sense realism. This is very antithetical to a lot of the mystical belief system, the hermetic alchemical principles that people like the Illuminati subscribe to. So when people say the Enlightenment is the problem, it's kind of, that's a very broad scope term. And really, which Enlightenment, which thinker are we talking about? Which philosophy is it that you take issue?
Right.
So
It's almost just like saying Bronze Age or something. It's just a stamp for a time where all these people were thinking on different subjects, I
totally.
think. So
Yeah.
Wilhelm Wundt, very influential. They say that he was, like, according to the historians of psychology, this is Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt, but he was ranked first in the most all-time eminence, above William James and Sigmund Freud.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. He
So
was
he's there. So these people are all studying. He has huge amounts he's very influential to
to a
the kind of
lot of,
academic community in psychology. And
yes.
then
And yeah, so he really set up a lot of these, people who became very instrumental in shaping the American education system and the American psychology. And he was really the first to be an experimental psychologist. So now where it was to lend this credibility to psychology as a science, as opposed to it just being kind of this theory, like a philosophy. But I don't really think it's so much. It's a social science. It's really not a hard science, and a lot of it is rooted in mysticism more so than science, or science as we think of it in terms of the scientific method. But part of the credibility really came from this idea of treating humans as lab rats. The Pavlovian method, Skinner, and this is all coming from Wilhelm Wundt. So I like to bring him up. I think he's really important and integral to kind of spearheading all of this. And then we have Freud with his talking cure, and that became one of the signature methods of the Tavistock Institute, or even before it became Tavistock. I had mentioned the American Society for Psychical Research that was founded in 1885. And then right around the same time, we have a little bit later in 1909, the Secret Intelligence Service, the which became the MI6, was founded. I think that's worth noting because they really did. You'll see that Tavistock is kind of like, another branch of the intelligence apparatus, the Five Eyes, the Anglo-American establishment intelligence apparatus. And then we have 1914, and it becomes the Wellington House. And so they always do this. It's under the guise of defense, right? I always make the joke that if they put a D in front of it, they get a carte blanche like Black Ops budget and they can do whatever they want. And as long as they put a D in front of it. And that's essentially what they did here. So the Germans had a German propaganda bureau. And so they decided that they had to have a British propaganda bureau. And so this was at the Wellington House, and it was in 1914. This was to garner acquiescence primarily from the British and the American populace to engage in the First World War. And surprisingly enough, they did not want to engage in the First World War. At the time, it was called the Great War. They didn't know it was going to be the Second War. But although I have some questions about how much of that has been planned, but it certainly seems like they've got agendas there. But it was initially under David Lloyd George, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I never say that well, Exchequer, but he was given the task.
Exchequer, maybe?
Exchequer, that's it. Exchequer. Yeah, Exchequer. So he was given the task of setting up this British War Propaganda Bureau, which was also colloquially at the time known as the Lie Factory. So, but he set it up, and then he appointed his a fellow liberal writer who was Charles Masterman, and to what the first thing that they did was Masterman got 25 literary figures together, and many of them were Fabians. It was the people like Rudyard Kipling was invited, but the writing says that he wasn't able to attend, but H.G. Wells was, and of course H.G. Wells we know was trained by Thomas Henry Huxley, who was known as Darwin's bulldog, and then he was the teacher to the Huxley brothers, Julian and Aldous Huxley. And then there was Chesterton, Masefield, Bennett, Arthur Doyle, William Archer, Hall Caine, Thomas Hardy, Gilbert Parker, Trevelyan, Henry Newbolt, and John Galsworthy were some of the names. And they wrote almost 1,200 pamphlets and books and literary works, and they kept the whole operation secret until 1935. And this was all like pro-war propaganda. That was one of the first things that they did. So it was this propaganda bureau. And then, of course, they had Lord Northcliffe, who was the owner of the Times and the Daily Mail, and he was put in charge of propaganda that was aimed at enemy nations, while Robert Donald, who was the editor of the Daily Chronicle, was made the director of propaganda aimed at neutral nations. And then of course, in 1919, Edward Bernays becomes a Tavistock director. And Edward Bernays is the double nephew of Sigmund Freud, and his nephew is the founder of today's modern propaganda machine, also known as Netflix.
It's incredible. It's really not even believable. But yeah, Bernays is all over the place. There's a picture of Bernays in my slides we'll get to of him with Eleanor Roosevelt. Yeah, but he was around. He made it past like post-war. His influence was like 40 years, right?
Yeah, he wrote the signature book on propaganda. He's known as kind of the father of PR. I do think William Munzenberg deserves some credit for that one, though. He had a huge PR operation in Germany. So Edward Bernays in 1919 becomes a director, and it was they were tasked with setting up this Creel Commission. So George Creel, who then later does all these pictorial ads, later in World War II, he had the Beat the Promise ads, the Uncle Sam Wants You ads, and he did like 4-minute videos, all trying to recruit for the war and recruit both the support as well as engagement. And they also oversaw. So Wilson ran on the campaign that he would not get us into World War I. He was one of the first presidents to use the term New World Order. Of course, we heard this again with Bush and a couple of others, but he was one of the first ones to talk about the New World Order. And he had run on the campaign that he wouldn't get us into the war because it wasn't popular. And then it was the Creel Commission with Walter Lippmann, who was an American journalist, and Edward Bernays, who created the propaganda and oversaw his campaign to then switch. And they also created the propaganda for things like the Tariff Act, the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, and to convince the Americans that this was a great idea and that somehow this was going to be good for the future of America, which, of course, as we are seeing today, is not necessarily true.
It's a disaster. It's a catastrophe. The Federal Reserve is a catastrophe. I think Massey, Representative Massey, just put in a bill
He
to end
did.
the Federal Reserve. Yeah, so it's
He
still an
did.
issue. And
It's-
what's interesting is that Bernays and Lippmann worked with Samuel Untermeyer, who was a
Yep.
well-known lawyer in New York, and Untermeyer Park is where all the Sons of Sam stuff happened. Like, it was a nexus point for all kinds of ritual stuff, but it's totally occulted. That whole park, if you understand the occult, you see the sphinxes and the pillars and the reflecting pool. I mean, it's all there. Like, it's really high end. He did a good job. He was like a millionaire. He was a real scoundrel. I think he worked for Standard Oil too.
I think he did. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was definitely a scoundrel. I haven't seen it, that park in New York.
Oh no, yeah, we could go through it. It's a different show, but that's a whole nother show. Is the occult layout. The Sphinx is in Masonry is to know, to will, to dare, and to remain silent. So that's what it represents.
Wait,
It's
say
not
that again? I'm sorry.
to know, to will, to dare, and to maintain silence or keep quiet.
Wow.
So that's what it represents. Yeah, that's from Eliphas Levi actually kind of wrote that in one of his books, I think. Key to the Mysteries. So when you see that in anywhere, so if you see that at House of the Temple or anywhere, the Sphinx, usually it's not just the Sphinx itself, but it's its philosophical / esoteric representation. But it's there in the Untermeyer Park. It's really something else.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe we'll have to do a show on that one.
Yeah.
And so in 1917, they set up a polling, which Edward Bernays himself says is manufacturing consent. So they started that whole process, which we see that today, where they give you all these polls like for the elections, and so much of it is propaganda. So they were really behind that, and then so like Bernays says, those who manipulate the unseen mechanisms of the society constitute the invisible government, which is the true ruling power over the country. So so it started out as a propaganda bureau, and it wasn't until 1920 that it became the Tavistock Clinic. And it's worth noting again the occult connections to this, because the donation for the Tavistock building, which was designated for doing shell shock therapy research, on the post-traumatic stress of the soldier, this was donated by the Duke of Bedford, who was the 11th Marquis of Tavistock. And he was related to Russell and Taft, who created the Order of Skull and Bones. And Taft was also related to our President Taft, but yeah.
Wow, crazy.
So
yeah, those occult connections are there. There's no question.
They're there.
This is the Untermeyer Park. It was formerly his estate. Imagine this guy figuring out the Federal Reserve, walking under two sphinxes with the twin pillars all over the place, like twin pillars. Like, that's a whole nother show. But yeah, the guy was something else. Yeah,
for sure. Crazy. So so the clinic was established under Hugh Crichton Miller, with several other donations, and you hear different names, like Coleman talks about the Astors and the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers. It seemed the Royal Crown. It seems like there were many of the usual players involved in the seed funding for both the Wellington House and then the Tavistock Clinic. And of course, later for the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, that actually came from a specific grant by the Rockefellers.
wow.
So,
the usual suspects, right?
Yes.
The usual suspects. So, I mean, it's all there. It just goes back to these same characters putting together this stuff. And really it's kind of MK Ultra, where they got the best psychologists of the time, right? So they got Rees, they got Lewin, they got, all these guys to do their thinking for them to kind of solve the problems. It was interesting too, because people don't know this guy Rees, but he like literally said, Rees wrote, "We must have mobile teams of psychiatrists who are free to move around and make contacts with the local situation in their particular area." So, like, he's speculating like how to solve problems is like parachuting in groups of psychiatrists or psychologists, which is all over the events of post World
Yeah,
War II U.S. Yeah.
he wrote Shaping Psychiatry by War, right? And he became the deputy director of Tavistock in 1926. And he's the one who talks about how we should create fifth column, the psychologist to be the fifth columnist. He says we can therefore justifiably stress our particular point of view with regard to the proper development of the human psyche, even though our knowledge may be incomplete. We must make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. The education system and the church, public life, politics, and industry should be within our sphere of influence. If we are to infiltrate the professional and social activities of other people, I think we must imitate the totalitarian and organize some kind of fifth column activity. If better ideas on mental health are to progress and spread, we, as the salesmen, must lose our identity. Let us all, therefore, very secretly be fifth columnists. And that's from Mental Health, Volume 1, November 4th. Oh, number 4, October 1940. Sorry. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Like, we're just going to do it, you know? And like, that was the whole thing. And like, he knew of the whole concept of how war shapes society, right? Shock. And then, you can drive the majority. I mean, he used words like psychosis, like driving people to psychosis. So he
Yeah.
knew that, right? Yeah, it's incredible.
They were calculating the breaking points of the soldiers, and then they realized that they could not only calculate it, but once they figured out what the breaking points were, they could create them, which is pretty sinister.
They could create the breaking point, but then also be the one to cure it too. So they were kind of like the poison and the cure, right? He was thinking on those kind of lines.
Yes, well, it depends on your definition of cure, I think, but
Right.
yeah.
Good point. Yeah. Very
Yeah.
well said. But that's what's really interesting is that this stuff was being done, in the 30s and 40s. So they were really, I mean, this is Tavistock. So it's
This
all
is
kind of secret. Yeah.
This is Tavistock, and it was all being done. I mean, it was being done 20s, 30s, 40s, and then of course in the 30s we have the whole psychiatry of radio study that was done on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, right? The invasion from Mars experiment, and that was really
October
interesting.
30th, 1938, correct? October 30th, 1938. Coleman
Yeah,
marks that as a
1937,
very
I believe.
37,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
He marks that as a very important part in the whole Tavistock development, right?
He does, and it's interesting that Cantrell, who was running it, was actually roommates with Rockefeller at Dartmouth, and he did this whole experiment. And the Rockefellers wouldn't let him publish it for a few years. I think it was 2 years before they let him publish it, and I'm not sure why. Coleman doesn't say. I haven't really found anything that indicates why they didn't release it for a while. But I do know that they wouldn't release it immediately. And then they later, through Fred Emery, they published the working hypothesis on the psychology of television. The psychological after effects of television are of considerable interest to the would-be social engineer. That was Emery, who, he was working on. He very much developed a lot of Bian's work. Wilfred Bion became his theories became the offshoot of the Tavistock in the United States. It was the A.K. Rice Institute in 1957 that was set up, and that was Rioche and Kenneth Rice who had started that, and that is. That was kind of the official headquarters of Tavistock in the United States. They have many now, but that's kind of the public out-facing headquarters.
Right. So it's almost for people to understand Tavistock is headquartered in London, but it just had offshoots and influences through different front organizations and things like that. So it's emanating from there, but its influence is really supranational, right?
I would agree. Absolutely. Definitely supranational. And they have offshoots all over that, these little spin-offs that like one of them is Ditchley. Ditchley is, and a lot of the try headquarters would be like Ditchley has an arm in London, in Canada, and the United States. I can find very little information on them. They're very, their website just looks very kind of sterile. It's not unlike Tavistock's websites, where they're pretty transparent these days. They're like just coming out telling you exactly what they're doing. So, but Ditchley, I can't find a whole lot on. It's a little bit more covert. So, but they do work through organizations like Ditchley, and yeah. But that was 1933. The Rockefeller Foundation president Max Mason and other Rockefeller financiers assured that the social scientists would concern themselves with the rationalization of social control and the control of human behavior. And that's a direct quote. Yeah, so they went through a lot of changes kind of during the 30s and 40s. I don't know all the details yet. I'm starting to dive into it, but it was around that time that Wilfred Bion led what was called Operation Phoenix. This isn't Operation Phoenix from the CIA. This was Tavistock's Operation Phoenix. And it was a whole restructuring of Tavistock, but they were learning from war. So it's really interesting. I'm sure you come across this too in your research. It's like the more you study about wartime, the more it seems like war is kind of a cover for doing a lot of this research and experimentation. That unfortunately later seems like it gets weaponized. I mean, the whole book, Shaping Psychiatry Through War, seems to indicate that it just in the title. But Wilfred Bion, they led this whole it was the Operation War Boards, Operation Selection War Boards. And Trist was on this committee. And so they created like this invisible college, which I think I haven't found this connection quite yet, but I think that's what was the like secret. What is LaRouche calls it, like kind of this um his like a secret back pocket. I don't remember what he called it, but that Churchill had as his like secret army, and it was Tavistock, and I think it was actually
invisible something. They called it the
Invisible College.
Yeah,
So
something like
yes, this was Tavistock's Invisible College, and they have it right on their website, not on this website. And maybe it's on this website. There's a couple, because there's the Tavistock Institute, then there's Tavistock.org. There's all sorts of different branches, but they actually go through the history and they talk about the Invisible College, but they don't make that connection that it was but I think that was the same that Churchill worked with. And so this is part of this whole like restructuring using the wartime research. So Bion then restructured all of the organization, and they took a lot of the testing and the methodology they had learned through the war in order to bring it in under the umbrella through Tavistock and restructure the entire organization. And some of the testing, like the war board selection testing, is a lot of what got utilized throughout the military, through the United States military, through the British military. A lot of how they select people. I can't prove this either, but I suspect it. I think it's part of where they came up with their whole mice to rascals. This is right off the CIA website. And so MICE stands for, are you familiar with this?
No.
Okay, so MICE stands for, this is how they recruit assets, but they later realized that rascals was a better acronym and a better methodology. But MICE stands for money, ideology. The C is double entendre, which is coercion or compromise. And then the E is ego.
Interesting.
And this is part of how this was used through the OSS, which later became this. And this is right off the CIA website that I got this article. And I think that a lot of this came out of some of the Tavistock work through the Office of War Board Selections, because they were doing all this testing on what they called intelligence. This is what they were saying, but they later said that it's not intelligence the way we think of it. They were talking about a lot of like social intelligence, and people who would make good leaders. But when you have to understand that when Tavistock's talking about leaders, Kurt Lewin, who was one of their directors, Kurt Lewin was actually a Frankfurt School refugee, who then went on to become a director of Tavistock. And he started the National Training Labs, which is also the National Education Association, is part of the National Training Lab. And I'm still confirming this, but I'm pretty sure that some of the seed funding for National Training Labs was through the ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, United States Office of Naval Intelligence. But the National Training Labs is where Lewin created something called topological social psychology, right? So it was all about the environment. And he felt that, well, human nature may be a certain way, but we behave differently in different environments. And so what can we change? We can change the environment. I bring this up because I was saying when you have to take into consideration when they're talking about leadership, they're creating change agents. And part of Lewin's whole research was around creating change agents. I don't have my book on the National Training Labs, but they had journals, but they also had several books that they wrote, and they talk about creating change agents specifically. And a lot of how this is done is through sensitivity training, right? So they essentially brainwash, and in their journal, they admitted that sensitivity training is brainwashing.
Wow.
And if you look at there is a CIA document on sensitivity training, and I've read it in my show on sensitivity training. I actually read through a lot of this document. You can pull it off the CIA website, but they talk about how they would really like to do some testing to prove the efficacy of sensitivity training, if this is really an effective way to
Wow.
resolve conflict. But the problem is that it's a little bit too reminiscent of Chinese brainwashing. And I think they were alluding to the Maoist struggle session. They don't say that, but they say the Chinese brainwashing. And
Wow.
they conclude by saying, so therefore, as much as we'd really like to conduct this, test and see how effective it really is, we can't, because we can't risk putting our military through that kind of harm and brainwashing them. And this
Wow.
is just
They know, they probably know at this point, but it's operational because I think like if Gina Carano or whatever from Disney, they put
yep,
her through a brainwashing technique. I
yep.
think they kind of gave her the zap too. Like I think she went through the stress of it. Like it affected her career, her personality. So you see this in action today. It's not a
Oh
joke.
yeah. This
Yeah.
is, but sensitivity training, and this was really like, I mean, the National Training Labs was in the 40s, and this really like, to, took way. And yes, well, it's directly connected to Esalen and the Human Potential Movement. That's why it's directly connected. That's
Right.
another offshoot of Tavistock. And we can get to that in a
I
minute. But
think Coleman mentions that too. He just says these are part of this whole network. He mentions Murphy at Esalen and all these
oh
other
yeah.
places.
Yeah, Michael Murphy and Richard Price, and this is and of course there's Maslow, who was part of Tavistock, right? They're all intertwined, and it does look like Esalen was working with the CIA. There's actually a document on the CIA website. I read this one also, and it's called the Esalen Hot Tub Diplomacy, and it was all about relations with the Soviet Union, and that's the gist of it was that sex, drugs, and rock and roll are going to create world peace, and yeah, that's
Right.
basically the gist of it. But it's called the
Right.
Esalen Hot Tub Diplomacy document.
It's really nice. I don't know if you've been by there, but I've taken that trip up Highway
I have.
1.
It's
Yeah,
a.
it's beautiful. It's
It
in a
is.
great spot. Yeah, but they won't let you in. I tried to go in to look around. They say,
Oh, I
John,
did a retreat there with my
oh,
mom
you did? Oh, nice. So, well,
years
there
and
you
years
go.
ago. Yep.
Yeah, that's
Um,
beautiful. And have you ever heard of the Nine? Did they mention the Nine? Because Murphy and his cohort, he co-founded it with another guy, but
Price.
they say they were Price. They said they were in contact with discarnate entities, is one way to put it.
Oh
Have you
yeah, the
heard that?
ninth.
Yeah, the
Yes.
Ninth. Yeah, yeah.
So everything is so intertwined. I just released yesterday an episode I did on World Invocation Day, which is today, by the way.
Oh wow,
Yes, World Invocation Day. So it looks to me like they're trying to summon the Antichrist. Uh,
wow.
they talk about invoking Christ, the Christ, but it's not Jesus Christ. Christ is just another ascended master like Buddha,
Right.
Krishna, and they think of him as a world teacher, and they're trying to summon him. And this started the first time that Christ could invoke this prayer was 1945, and it was because of the war. They were decimated by the war, and people were so devastated, and so it was an opportunity for the for this prayer for people to hear it. And Eleanor Roosevelt read the prayer, let the plan of love, light, and power restore the
Wow.
plan on earth. And when you read the prayer, there's a line about sealing the door of evil. They don't say on which side they're sealing that door. A little
Good point.
questionable in my opinion, but it is a very creepy, in my opinion, prayer, and it's very deceptive because they use words that sound. Who doesn't want love and
And
light,
light, right.
power? And they use words like Christ and Christ consciousness, which comes straight out of Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner. It's theosophical. They don't mean Jesus Christ. And they're trying to invoke it. And theosophy means divine wisdom. They believe that through theurgy, which is the divine work, that they can become gods essentially. And it is all connected. I mean, Tavistock is, they were inspired by Spangler's book, talking about the
Right.
decline of the West, right? And
Right.
they believed that so they kind of created their own ending. They're going to create the solution, and the solution is it's this new world order. And of course, Lucius Trust, which is invoking, World Invocation Day, was created by Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey is a disciple of Madame Blavatsky, and she talks about how her experience, and interestingly enough, they Blavatsky, Bailey, Annie Besant, they were all Masons, which typically women aren't Masons, but they were co-Freemasons. Some of the few women who were. Alice Bailey later marries Foster Bailey, who was a Freemason, and when she was a little girl in church, she was an Orthodox Christian. She was raised Orthodox Christian. I believe Madame Blavatsky was as well, which is interesting. They both rebelled, obviously. Blavatsky herself
Right.
says that theosophy welcomes all religions of the world, but diametrically opposed to Christianity.
Right. Right.
You're right.
Right. We're the ones we have to eliminate. That's what Barbara Marx Hubbard said. That the Christians are the
Yes.
problem. So
That's exactly right. And Barbara Marx Hubbard is one of these new thought leaders, and
yes.
talking about how we can co-create with God, because they believe
Sure.
that they are gods. And but Alice Bailey had a ascended master who came to her when she was in church and told her she could accomplish so much in the world if she just wasn't confined by the constraints of this very rigid cultural religious belief system. And he told her, Joel Kuhl, who helped her write 24 works,
Right.
he told her that her life's mission and her life's purpose was going to be to execute the mission of the Masons, which was to create a one world religion. And so he told her this, and that's pretty much what they did. If you look at Lucius Trust, it's what it looks like. And it does look to me, now this is my commentary, but it looks like that religion is Luciferian. But it is, right? It is definitely,
no question about it. I mean, Lucis, this is the Lucis Trust website. You can see the Lucis. It's very small, but that icon right there.
Well, in 1922, when she created it, it was Lucifer Publishing. And she changed it in 1923 to Lucius Trust, but it was Lucifer Publishing. So
I did a show on the externalization of the hierarchy.
where she outlines the 9-step plan for the New World Order.
Yeah, it's all there, but
it's on the Lucius Trust website.
Courteney, it's basically Nazism. It's really overlaps with Nazism so close that it's really shocking. They mention Untermenschen, they mention Aryans, they mention Descartes.
Well, yeah, the Aryan, the whole concept of the Aryan race comes from theosophy.
Yeah, no, it's
the
incredible.
root races, yeah.
Yeah. So the
and the
root
whole
race
idea of anti-Semitism, right? Blavatsky talks about how the Jews were a lesser race because they were more animalistic. So this whole concept, it was very influential on Hitler. This whole theosophical premise was influenced Hitler. Yeah.
He supposedly had one of her books, Blavatsky's book. I don't know if it was Isis Unveiled or one of them.
Unveiled. I don't have it.
Yeah, it was by
he
his
did.
desk.
Yeah.
She got busted for a lot of plagiarism, but she was total Luciferian. She always mentions Prometheus as this ideal.
Yep.
And yeah, she was something else. She also was really fat and ate a lot of hash, apparently. So
Yes.
her real maiden, she was actually ethnically German. That was her married name was Blavatsky. Her
Right.
last name was von Hone. I've done a lot of research on that, but
On
yeah,
her.
this
And she was
Lucis Trust,
influential
yeah,
on Aleister Crowley, and he
absolutely,
was a British intelligence asset.
no
I have
question.
trouble reading him, though. He's just a little too gross.
Heavy jargon, really gross, very sick-minded. But he thought that she was so important. I think one of her books was called "The Voice in the Silence." That he integrated that into the OTO. So
Yeah,
which was very odd for him because usually he was such an egotist, he could
right.
never really like mention anybody else or write it himself or do something or rip somebody off. But so yeah, I think he owed a certain debt to her. There's no
To
question
her.
about it. Yeah,
Well, yeah. So,
ideological debt, I should say.
yes, I agree. I agree. I think that's true. And yeah,
Wow, Invocation Day. So I guess this is the first time since the Gemini full moon since 1952. So this
yes.
also shows these guys astrotheology too. I think that's an important because maybe the Christian world or the whatever the atheist world, whatever they don't think about on astrological terms, but these guys do.
It's not atheistic. They're it's pantheistic. The new thought
Pantheistic,
leaders say it's panentheistic. So they say it's a little
panentheism.
different.
That's right.
Well, yeah, because it's God within each of us. It's Gnostic.
Right.
It's Gnosticism. And I say little g Gnosticism because I think that there is the very specific capital G Gnostics who were the heretics that, in the early days of Christianity. But it's still a very similar premise. It's this idea that God is malevolent and he trapped man because he withheld knowledge from them. And so it's really the snake, the serpent, Lucifer, who is the one that illuminates man through gnosis. And that it is through the gnosis that they have the possibility of becoming gods. This is through this whole, so theosophy, I think, falls under that umbrella of little g Gnosticism, which I incorporate, theosophy, Hermeticism, alchemy, all of these are under that umbrella of the little g Gnosticism. And there's nuanced differences where they believe that uh, the ability, the godlike powers originate, but it's all still this idea that they can become God. And this is also this whole theosophical religion is really where we get the planetary politics that world that Robert Mueller talks about, and the Gaia religion, because they believe that Mother Earth is God, and that we can become one with Mother Earth. They don't believe that there's a divine creator who created the earth and that we have dominion over the earth. They don't believe that. They believe that the earth is God and we can become one with the
Wow.
earth God. So yeah.
No, it's really
So
crazy. I mean, it goes back to all biblical stuff, right? Because the Bible basically said, "You shall be as gods," right? That's
yes.
Crowley's kind of view, and
Yes.
and all of the occultists, Leary and all these other guys, it's the tree of the fruit of knowledge, and then they stop right there. So it's
Yes.
really knowledge what's kept. That's very Gnostic. So it's
It's
like,
very
oh,
nice.
they kept us from Gnostic, just so. And both Robert Ann Wilson and Leary have very strong Esalen ties too. It's a whole other
Yeah.
show.
So I know some people have pointed out the Aquarian conspiracy. Marilyn Ferguson was the name of Willis Harmon's assistant or secretary, one or the other. And Willis Harman wrote Changing Images of Man. They conducted this study in the 60s, and this was Tavistock. So Tavistock kind of has tentacles everywhere. But it was a lot of the Tavistock psychologists who were working on this Changing Images of Man study, which was all about ushering in the age of Aquaria. Now, if you look on the UN website, you can actually find the Aquarian age community website. It's an off link, one of these links, and it's through the UN website. So they're connected. This is all interconnected. And they did this document. They conducted the study in the 60s. They published the first edition of it, I think, in 1974, and it wasn't until 1982 where they actually published the final edited edition of Changing Images of Man. I did not buy the book, but I do have the printed version here.
Nice.
And they really was all about, they were talking about how we have to usher in this post-industrial era. And does this sound familiar to what we're experiencing now? This book was designed to popularize the ideas that were in the Changing Images of Man. And then right around the same time, it was he called himself Bill Harmon in this document, and it's again Stanford Research Institute and Bill Harmon who were working on. They compiled Politics 3, which was Maslow, who was part of the Esalen Institute, right? This is his document called Politics 3, and it was all about holistic politics and advancing Eupsychian values. And this is something that Esalen talks a lot about. And that's having or achieving a superior mind or soul. They believe in what Barbara Marx Hubbard's foundation that was funded by the Rockefeller, this conscious evolution, right? She has the Foundation for Conscious Evolution. She has this lovely little chart. She talks about the wheel of co-creation. And
wow.
So essentially we become one with God, we co-create. And then this lovely one on the bottom, which is, you can find it at the Center for Integral Wisdom, which is another one of her organizations. And you see that lovely spiral, which goes through our crisis is our birth.
Wow.
And
that's right out of Tavistock.
It's right out of Tavistock, right?
Yeah.
Kurt Lewin's whole thing on, Kurt Lewin and Emery. Emery talks about segmentation and what was it called? Turbulence theory. And Lewin talks about freeze, unfreeze, refreeze. And this is that whole idea of this spiral evolution and trauma-based mind control, of course. But this evolutionary theory, Bruce Lipton, who's another evolutionary leader, he talks about how we started out as a amoeba, and part of what gives the amoeba is the intelligence is the membrane, and then of course you evolve. The next stage of evolution is this. It's the multicellular organism, and they're more intelligent because they have a more surface area of membrane, so it's more room to collect the information. And then humans are so intelligent because we're a complex multicellular organism, and then we have the possibility, and all of these people talk about this, and this is in you see the roots of this in the Changing Images of Man, which is one of the Tavistock documents. And they talk about how we can evolve, and Maslow talks about this too. We can evolve as one. And this next stage of evolution, we have the choice. Barbara Marx Hubbard says we can choose the next stage of evolution, or we can go extinct. And the next stage is where we can be the superorganism of humanity. And what does Lipton say that the membrane of humanity is? Of course, it's the internet. It's the global brain. Or as Ray Kurzweil says, the singularity is near, although his new book says the singularity is nearer. And the spiral, again, this is the Hegelian dialectic, right? The same model. And my opinion, I think what we're looking at is a Gnostic Jacob's ladder. They believe that this co-creation is how we can become God and transcend. And it's really this transhumanist world. And if you've read the documents of the UN 100, they talk about the AI world society. And of course, that is the virtual world. So it's not just the Hyborg mind. It's all encompassing. It is the internet is the global brain. And that seems to be where this is all directed. And when you look at Tavistock and what they're doing now, they talk about this. They have all these workshops on, understanding the internet. And these are the same people, these Tavistock psychologists, the same people who attended the Macy conferences on cybernetics.
Yeah.
Right? The Macy Foundation.
I've done a lot of shows with Dr. Hans Uter about the Macy conferences, and it's an adjunct to kind of this same subject. Same people. Mead, Bateson, same characters. Yeah.
Yep. Same people. And
stuff,
so that when you look at Tavistock's website now, they actually say, this is so crazy how transparent they are. They say, Gnostic Reticulus, now is your time. This is the awakening.
Wow, really?
I know.
On their website? Wow. Let's see if Gnostic pops up.
Gnostic Reticulus. So reticulus, like in biology, is kind of like the net that creates the structure. And I think what they're saying is like the Gnostic architects of society. They're the people who are creating these structures for for social change.
There it is. Just like you said.
You found it?
Wow. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me bring it up.
Pull it up.
No, it was there.
There it is.
Wow.
Yeah. To awaken to a new knowing and integrity and courage to do what you say and live what you know. Awakening is the process by which we begin to see, hear, and feel clearly about ourselves, our organization, and our communities as purposeful, interconnected, and resourceful. Gnostic Reticulus, this is your time, our time, your hour. Yeah.
That's so incredible.
Can't make this up.
No, you cannot make that up. And
And
that's
of
kind of
course,
the scary use of the word awakening. Like some people,
I know.
they attribute it to like American Great Awakenings Christian, but it's also a similar word, very kind of Luciferian, where one word means two different things in two different environments.
Polysemny. That's what they're masters of. Polysemny.
I don't even know what
This
that
is
is.
like this multiple use of the same word.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that's how language gets weaponized, right? Is through this. It's through polysemic.
Right.
Use
I just
language.
would have that. I just posted something on my social media about the word democracy. Like the
Yep,
two, they're using the
exactly.
same word, and two people are like two different things, man.
Yep.
It's not what you think. They know the public.
When they say democracy, they mean revolution. That's really
Yeah.
what they mean, because it's
Yeah.
mob rule. So it's the power of the mob
Yeah.
to
The
create
power of the
revolution.
proletariat or whatever. Yeah.
Right. To create the revolution.
Wow. They really just telling the truth on their website today,
They are.
guys. Yeah. This
I
is not
know.
like 1930s or something. Wow.
They talk about the Leicester. I mean Leicester. How do you pronounce it? I'm terrible.
I think it's Leicester. They drop all the letters.
Leicester. Okay. Their workshop is coming up in September,
There's
right
Leicester
around the
Conference.
same time that the UN is doing their global digital compact, which is at the Summit for the Future. They're doing that in New York in September. So the Leicester conference is around the same time. That's been going on since the 50s, but this is where they create change agents. And they pretty much say it when you look at what they talk about the Leicester conference, and they say what will happen. It's a 2-week event, and they pretty much say they're going to do sensitivity training. And what was sensitivity training? It was brainwash that went under many different names, like T groups. They said were sensitivity training for normals, which was essentially sensitivity training for normies, where they could put it into corporations, right? The Tavistock and National Training Labs are who created the field of organizational industrial psychology. Kurt Lewin was one of the founders of social psychology. And what was the whole purpose of that? In my opinion, it kind of, hindsight's 2020, but looking back, what it looks like is they want to create a dissolution of all nation states, right? They want, what is happening with corporations? Corporations is a way that you could achieve supranational power because they're international companies. And we saw this really take hold during COVID, right? During COVID, you may have had your local county, even your local state. They may have had their own rules and mandates, but what happened when you entered a big box international corporation? You were beholden to them regardless. You had to follow their mandates and their rules regardless. And that is what creating corporate culture is all about. And what do they do?
You become a human resource. You really become a resource.
Human resource.
You lost your individual. You become de-individuated.
And
it's really a psychological process. I've been in corporations, man. It's unbelievable. You become like an NPC or whatever.
Yep. And that comes straight out of Tavistock. So this is operational research. And this, this was really hard. This was J.R. Lawrence who wrote this book, but it was edited by him. It's a compilation of Trist is in here. All the Tavistock psychologists are in this book. Oh, to see if you can see it.
Yeah, well, let's do it again. Let me put it up here so people can see it.
Operational research and the social sciences.
Yeah, edited by J.R. Lawrence.
Yeah, that's how it's edited. But I mean,
one of the interesting things. Yeah, go ahead. Please.
Sorry. I was just going to read some of the name, but it's all the Tavistock psychologists. And this was found in a like a Xerox garbage at IBM. And then
Wow. So like Tavistock had its own retinue of psychologists, and then MK Ultra or whatever they call it at any given time.
Well, they're
its own. Like it's scary. Yeah.
They're interconnected. I mean, right? You've got like Bateson and Jolly West, they all worked with Esalen and the Tavistock psychologist. I don't think personally that I don't think MK Ultra could have happened without all the research that Tavistock and
Oh, I don't think so either.
Maudsley
No.
Hospital at Mapother they were doing, and Mapother and Tavistock Medical Clinic actually merged in I can't remember if it was the late, I think it was the early 30s when they merged. But they work directly, so one is doing like insulin shock therapy, the other one is doing essentially trauma-based mind control, doing
Right.
the shell shock therapy research.
It's incredible. No, there's no doubt that the MK Ultra is not 1953. It goes way back, even
Mhm.
before like the history of hypnosis and all this stuff. But it's
Oh yeah.
really was just a modernization and technocratic approach to those themes is really it. Included all that stuff from Tavistock and World War II research and stuff like that. But people, and I just want to make a point, people in corporations kind of have this liminal dread or liminal feeling that like something's off just being part of this as being part and what they have to do to make the money out of being in a corporate culture. They don't see this background stuff of Tavistock, that there's like a kind of a sinister de-individuation that's taking place. Maybe if you're the CEO, not so much the case, but if you're just a rank and file member,
Yeah.
you've been socially psychologized or whatever you want to call it, and
Yeah.
these are kind of the antidotes to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they do all this sensitivity training throughout
Yeah,
corporations, and it is to socially engineer the culture, right? So that
right.
you fall in lockstep with their agenda. And I do think the whole purpose of that is to create these supranational entities that are going to pave the way for the AI world society. When you read the documents of the AI World Society, so they're doing it in conjunction with Boston Global Forum. Michael Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, wrote this book. It's called Remaking the World, An Age of Global Enlightenment. I do think that that's a nod to the Theosophical society, enlightenment. I think the illuminated one is kind of what they're saying. But when you read this book, they talk about how in the AI World Society, human governments are going to be supplanted by AI governments. And I think that that's really, so they're kind of conditioning us with dissolving the nation states and dissolving national borders and sovereignty through the corporations. And then the next step from there is to create kind of these like power blocks. And then we will see the, AI kind of take over, and then they can consolidate it all into one, the AI World Society. The AI World Society is very scary to me. They talk about
Yeah.
Ukraine being the central hub of the AI World Society. They did a whole symposium on rebuilding Ukraine. It sounds a little like tear down so you can build back better. There, they said it was decimated by the war, so we need to keep sending like support and funding over to Ukraine so it can be the centralized hub of this AI World Society, which will be connected to all of these C40 15-minute cities, smart cities all around the world. And essentially it's a virtual world, and they've already done some beta testing with it at the island of Tuvalu. They convinced them, using the Gaia religion, they convinced them that it was going to go underwater because of climate change, and they shipped everybody out to Australia and told them they can never see their homes, their loved ones, their with unless it was in the virtual world.
Wow, that's incredible. That's
Yeah.
incredible. So they shipped them out.
Yes. So
That's
they're creating
amazing.
it
One of
is.
the interesting things that is a theme within Estelin's book is the idea of modification without realization. So that's the whole thing of like looking into the subject, like you've looked into Tavistock, is how much of your personality and your culture and your environment has been manipulated without your realization. You may liminally get a sense like something's off, but these
Mhm.
type of inquiries solidify in the mind like these guys are intentionally manipulating. They're creating stress in your environment to put stressors on you to manipulate you and then have the appropriate outcome. That's what's really
Well, yeah, that was
terrifying.
what
Yeah.
John Rawlings Rees said, was that we could create these controlled environments, and then that would impact it would be a way of this is the exact quote. He said, psychologically controlled environments. This is the Tavistock method in order to make people give up their firmly held beliefs under peer pressure. And this is John
Yeah.
Rawling Rees, who was one of the first directors,
Yeah.
one of the early directors of Tavistock.
Right there he is, right there.
Yep.
One of the funny things when we were talking, this is Alat Aram, right? So
Oh yeah.
she
She's she
she's
leads
making.
the Leicester conference.
Yeah, that's what I said. Good. You made that point. I just made that connection. She's making the sign of the secret knowledge, right? She's pointing at her head. That's what they always, this is a secret, just like the sign of silence. And then there she is, Islet Aram at the Thessalonica, Greece conference, just like you said. Oh,
Mhm.
no. I think it's a different one. Where is it? I think that was it. Well, did it already happen or is it happening? No,
No, it's
it
coming
is.
up. I think it's
Yeah, there it is.
September
It's this right here.
2024. Yep. Yes, 2 to September 6, 2 to 6.
Right. And look at how they're talking about climate change. It's a
Oh, this
self-imposed
is a different
atrocity.
conference. This is a
Okay,
different
but I'm
conference. The
right.
Leicester conference is also in September. I don't know
Okay,
what.
this is the one I'm highlighting right here. I think this is the
Okay.
one you're talking about, right? It's
No,
2 to
I'm talking
6
about the Leicester conference, but
Okay,
that's in
let's go back.
September also. But this is another one. Okay.
Okay, let's go back. Anyway, it's
Yeah,
interesting to see these
it
people
is.
in action. Like Tavistock is still alive and active. It's not an anachronism. It's
People
still
think
legit.
that because of the lawsuits that shut down the gender clinic, that it's disappeared. But people don't understand that this is a very intricate web, and the transgender clinic was like a small part of Tavistock. It was originally, I think, Chargers College. Chargers Hospital. I think that's what it originally was called, and that in 2017 they merged to become the Tavistock gender clinic. But that did get shut down. I think that in no way does that mean Tavistock is going anywhere. As you can see from their website, they're alive and well, and
Right.
they're really working right now. I think it's on creating change agents to lead us into transhumanism. I think that's really what it looks like when you go through their website.
Wow, it's incredible. And they have these awakening organizations, so the work is coming. Like they're still working on this stuff. It's incredible. Century of the Self.
The
We
century of
are,
itself, right?
yeah.
I really think Tavistock was largely instrumental in breeding, the dark triad personalities, and the whole field of psychology. I think, I have to just qualify when I say this because, I don't want to say that everybody who goes into the field is a dark, sinister, or cluster B personality. I think there's some wonderful people who have done good work and who really want to help other people. So I just want to qualify by saying that. But I do think the field of psychology, when you look at the inception, it was created by these psychopaths who want to socially engineer and control the masses. And I think that they were very involved in. I have a book on it, actually, like the cult of the self, and the whole
Wow.
field, I think, really bred dark triad personalities and really exacerbated narcissism. And when you look at the MK Ultra studies, they talked about how they could figure out ways to exacerbate dark triad personality. So that's Machiavellianism, narcissism, and borderline and psychopathy. I would put in there. I really see that they've weaponized and exacerbated borderline personality disorder as well. And I think that that's through Bowlby's work. Bowlby he worked with Bion. He was a Tavistock psychologist. He did a lot of work during the 30s on child development, but he was known for his attachment theories. And we know that one of the things they discovered is that there's a correlation between RAD, which is reactionary attachment disorder, and then borderline personality disorder later. Developing from that. And we know that reactionary attachment disorder largely stems from anxious, ambivalent childhood rearing practices. So this is where they say that, like child of schizophrenics fare better than alcoholics. And
Hmm.
it comes out of this theory, largely because people who, alcoholics may sometimes be there and then sometimes not. Sometimes they're very warm and fuzzy, and then sometimes, it depends on the person, right? But that creates the anxious, ambivalent attachment because they don't know whether or not their primary caretaker is going to be there for them. Whereas with the schizophrenic, and that's just an example. That's how the saying goes. But, the idea of having a primary caretaker that the child knows they can't depend on is actually they fare better because they know that they won't depend on them. Whereas if
Right.
they can't,
Yeah.
they're constantly in this limbo state. So
Interesting.
all this to say that I think that knowing that, they've been able to create and exacerbate borderline personality disorders. But I think they've really, I mean, we see narcissism, and narcissism is so essential for this Gnostic belief system, right? To believe that we could become gods, which they really need people to subscribe to in order to create this transhuman world that they're looking to. Sorry.
I mean, it goes in. The thing is, what's really scary is you're kind of born into this Tavistockian world, right? And the manipulation and things that have already been researched even before you and I were born, which is really scary. But Courtney, we are almost at the 90-minute mark. I mean, is there anything you'd like to add or kind of finalize or summarize? And then maybe you can tell the audience where to find your work, your podcast, what you've been up to, and what's on the future.
Sure. If I've been invited to be a part of the Inspire Global Leadership Summit that I would be flying out to Geneva next week. And this is to come up with parallel systems where we can exit the WHO. As you know, the WHO is part of the UN, which is, of course, connected to Tavistock and all of these, people who are trying to essentially erode our freedom of consciousness. That's really what this is all about when you look at the AI World Society, and certainly erode our medical freedom. We saw that over the past few years. And so they're doing kind of I guess you'd call it kind of like a think tank to bring people together from all over the world to come up to strategize ways that we can retain personal sovereignty, retain national sovereignty, and medical freedom. And I'm honored to be invited. And the second day is a rally, which is protesting the WHO pandemic agreements, which, they changed it to agreements because the treaty needs to be ratified. So they changed the name. The sleight of hand is very clever. But anyway, all this to say that in my website and on my X, I have links to the Give, Send, Go campaign. If anybody, I mean, the smallest amount helps tremendously. Is such an expensive, just the flight alone is so expensive. But I have committed. So I do want to go and do whatever I can to be a voice to help hopefully change the trajectory, because this looks bleak. So I wanted to just plug that. And I have it on my website.
So for people who don't know, what's your website's address?
It's CourteneyTurner.com. And I spell my name a little differently. It is Courtney, but it's spelled like Courtenay. So that's CourtenayTurner.com. And for people who prefer Venmo, I'm accepting that as well. So that is at Courtney, again, Courtenay, Courtenay -Turner, TURNER. And my website has all of that. I have a little ad for the Stop the WHO on there. So
cool. So people can check that out. And then your podcast, like you're doing you're on 2 shows today, or 1 or 2 or something.
So today was 2. Some days it's 5. It's been crazy. I think last week we did 16, but I'm going to be traveling for a lot of June. So we have a couple of conferences and I'll be doing media coverage there. So I kind of front loaded, but we've definitely, I think in the past 3 years, we've been over 400 episodes. That's interviews, but I also do the radio hour, which is like a 1-hour lecture style. I do kind of a dive on a subject. And then I also do a show with Dr. Lee Merritt, and we call it The Dangerous Dames.
Nice. So you've got a lot of things going on. And then the best place to contact you is your website or X or Twitter. What's the best place?
So Twitter at Courtney Turner. My website, you can email me through the website easily. I'm on Instagram, pretty active there also. I showcase more of my fitness stuff there and personal stuff because they're just terrible with the shadow banning and censorship. So, yeah.
Understood. So I will put a link to all that stuff. I have your links and a link tree so people can check that out. And I do recommend people listen to your podcast. Great kind of subjects, guests, and information. And again, today we talked about the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, and the guest was Courtney Turner, but name spelled CourtenayTurner. So thanks so much for your time, Courtney.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Happy trails. I hope you have a safe trip to Switzerland.
Thank you.
All right. Stay there.
Okay.